There it says
Okay,
recording.
there it says recording. All right, let me just switch this over.
Oh, right. Aha! It says I'm the host now. Great, cool. Thank you so much. So, in normal times, I kind of I what I love about the artist's life is I've been lucky enough to cobble together enough work to live, which is a true miracle. But what I love especially is being able to work in so many different mediums, and the way that those mediums inform each other and the way that they contrast. So usually I'm working, I'm a resident company member at a theater here in Providence, Rhode Island called Trinity Repertory Company, which has been around for 50 plus years. And because I'm a member of the company there, I'm able to do about 3 to 4 shows a year at Trinity. And usually if I'm so lucky, I'll do like 2 to 4 roles on TV or film per year. And then usually I'll workshop some new plays, other places, and fill all of that in with audiobook narration. And I love the way that the skill set, my work in audiobooks starts to inform my work in theater and vice versa. And my work on stage, I start to learn things about my film performances through my experiences on stage. It all feeds one another. And what's been so strange about this year is that audiobooks used to be about, I don't know, a third of what I do. And thank goodness, I mean, most of my artist friends are really, really struggling in deep ways right now. And my husband and I were able to pivot entirely to audiobooks. So it's also been fascinating to see how my relationship to the art form changes when it is kind of an 8-hour clock in, clock out workday. So I'd say that before the pandemic, I'd probably narrated, I don't know, 150 books, and now I'm well over 200. Oh, I'm going to admit Linda and Bob. They've entered the waiting room. Good. Hi, Linda and Bob. Welcome. You've missed almost nothing. We're just getting started. Wonderful. So I came to audiobook. I'll give you like a crash course in how I got involved in all of this. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I don't know about where you all are. There weren't that many theater companies. Like I'm learning that on the East Coast, like almost every town has a theater company or a couple of theater companies that are professional and doing all sorts of work. And that wasn't the case in New Mexico. So I started out as a dancer when I was little. I always talked way too much. So I think my parents shoved me in dance just to get me to shake a lot of my sillies out. And I thought that was going to be what I did. And I ended up breaking my knee pretty seriously when I was like 13. And so my ballet teacher, he immediately knew that the path was probably going to shift. And so he kind of shoved me into towards the children's theater. And I just latched on and like blossomed and never looked back. So I trained in theater. I went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia and did my bachelor's there, a broad-based liberal arts education. Then I worked in theater for 5 years and knew that I wanted a graduate degree to get some formal training as opposed to the broad-based liberal arts, which I had previously done. And I ended up doing my master's degree in acting at Brown University, which is in tandem with Trinity Rep. The theater company and the university have collaborated to make a master's program in acting and directing. So while I was there, the actors that come through the master's program are more or less guaranteed a professional show on the main stage at Trinity. And my show wound up being, I got cast in The Importance of Being Earnest. And that was back, I'm dating myself. That was back in 2009. And at that time, I don't know if my dates are exactly right on this, but at that time, I believe that audiobooks had begun to really make the shift from when I was driving back and forth to Virginia every year for college. My mom and I would go to the library and get out like all of the CDs to a couple of audiobooks. Like I loved for those cross-country drives. I loved Patricia Cornwell mysteries. They were the Case Carpetta was awesome. My mom and I would listen and drive and get all excited. And around '09 and a couple years before, audiobooks were starting to shift into digital format, as opposed to having to cart around like the binders full of discs. And because of that, audiobook companies started realizing that they didn't necessarily need to be located in, say, New York or Chicago or LA, that they could really locate anywhere and digitize their product. And it wasn't hard to continue to do business. And so at that time, a couple of years earlier, BBC Audiobooks America had looked at their rent bill in Manhattan and gone, what are we doing? And so they rented a huge warehouse facility and office space in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. Where's North Kingstown, Rhode Island? Nobody knows. It's in the south of Rhode Island. It's like 45 minutes from Providence. It's an adorable beach community. I highly recommend it if you want a good, uncrowded beach experience in the summers. Really sweet. But so they relocated, and the casting director from BBC Audiobooks America at the time was friends with somebody in earnest and came to see that show. And afterwards was like, do you do audiobooks? You should maybe think about doing audiobooks. And I went, and so he invited me to come audition. I drove down to North Kingstown and got into their little booth and read some like romance or something. And he gave me my first audiobook job, which I was still a master's student. So I was, trying, I think I was able to pay my apartment, like there was black mold everywhere. And I was paying like $300 a month in rent for like this tiny little room that didn't actually have four walls. There was like a curtain. But, and so the money that I got from that first audiobook, my tiny grad student mind just exploded and was like, this is it. So I continued to build my resume with BBC Audiobooks America. They eventually sold to a company and then another company that was located in Oregon. And that coincided with the time that I was moving to New York City to start my professional life outside of school. And the same casting director, it's amazing how like one or two people can really change the course of your life. As I was getting ready to move to Brooklyn, that casting director said, we're really curious about what it would be like to maybe work with narrators that have their own home studios. Would you mind if we took the train down, me and a technician, like the week after you move in, and like we could maybe just build you a studio to see if like that would work? And I went, and so Sweet Dan and Will came down on the train with like suitcases of equipment and built me and my husband, Charlie, a remote audiobook recording studio in a closet in our Brooklyn apartment. And from there, I never had to wait tables as an actor in New York City because I was able to narrate audiobooks. And the flip side of that was, as an actor who was launching my professional career in a major hub for the first time, the thing that I was realizing, I'd worked in regional theater, and in regional theater, actors are prized who can like play a wide variety of roles. And that's one of the things that I loved in acting. And I found that in New York, the people that were really excelling were able, like they knew the type that they were, and they played that type perfectly. So I found myself playing a lot of the same types of roles and really hungry to stretch my boundaries. And here I was with this studio where I could be a Pakistani cab driver. I could be an octogenarian French transplant. I could be anything that my mouth could figure out a way to wrap around and get inside. I had agency and ownership to portray those roles. So I was simultaneously stretching my legs as a professional actor and finding that like that tends to be kind of a thin breadth of work in cities like that. And then also just like biting through characters that I'd never I was playing like a under the bed monster in this young adult adventure. And so I was trying to figure out what does an under the bed monster sound like? And then like, what is a gnome who's really grumpy and from Scotland under a bridge? It was just the perfect time. And so from there, I continued auditioning for different publishers. My husband and I bought the recording equipment from the folks from BBC Audiobooks America so that we could use the equipment to work with other producers and not feel horrible about it. And at that time, Audible was really expanding its roster. So I went out to New Jersey, their headquarters, and auditioned there and started working with them. And it really has carried me. I mean, it literally saved our lives this year. So we were able to pay our mortgage and on all of that. But that's really been my journey thus far with the career of audiobook narration. I should pause for a moment and see if anybody has questions so far about that trajectory or what it is to break into the business or how I find work or do I audition or any questions that might pop up thus far before I sally forth. Cool. I feel like I should pause longer just in case anybody's typing, but I can always loop back. So that's a little dive into me and my trajectory thus far. And then, oh, do I have a preference? Annabelle says, do I have a preference on what kind of roles I take? You know, it kind of changes for me. It's an interesting, it's like a similar question for me as what's your dream role in theater or TV or film. And I find that I'm such a, I love chewing on a new problem. So generally the thing that I'm most excited about is like the thing I'm chewing on in the moment. It's an interesting dance though. To be completely candid, there are some tropes within romance that I struggle with personally in terms of my own personal ethos and agency and consent and all of that. But lately I've loved young adult novels because the characters tend to be like so vibrant and you can kind of go as far as your imagination will take you. But I've also really loved, I've been dipping into more and more nonfiction. And anytime that I can learn something new, recently I took a deep dive. A journalist wrote a book called Behind the Kingdom's Veil about her experiences living and working in Saudi Arabia. And she also wove in what the regime change that has been going on with MBS there has meant for different walks of society. And I loved learning that. I've been loving nonfiction lately. There was a deep dive into the recent massacre in Mexico a few years back of the students that disappeared, and then it was discovered that they were dead. And just learning, I didn't know any of the specifics of what was happening in those towns that led to this tragedy. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was being paid to take a deep dive into something that was making me better as a human citizen. So things like that I really love. I see a couple more questions down here. In tandem with the last question, are there any roles you refuse to take? Thanks. That's a great question, Courtney. I rarely refuse roles, and I have. There have been a number of romance novels where it was really romanticizing rape. And so the woman was saying no, and I've come across it a lot where it's like the man's going, oh, but I know she's into it, and like does it anyway, and then the woman is like, I did want it, I just didn't know, and I just can't quite, like I can't endorse it. There are roles that I don't necessarily want. Like if a casting director were Googling Rebecca Gibel, I wouldn't want those books to necessarily pop up first because I don't want to be typecast in that way. So I have a top secret pseudonym that I work under. So yeah, but the ones there was another book that dealt with, it was another consent issue, but it also involved a male identifying character who was autistic. And so it was almost like equating people on the autism spectrum with not being able to to either identify consent or making it okay that this person didn't, and that it was part of it was just a little too tangled for me. So those are the ones that I've thus far stayed away from. I think I had one more chat. Let me see here. Do you try out a variety of voices before you get the one that feels right for a character? I do. Yeah, Diane, I do. What's great about the booth, I feel like when I'm in a recording session, it feels very much the same as a theater rehearsal, because I'm usually, when I record, it's almost never that, it's very rare that audiobook narrators record with a director either listening in or on the other side of the recording booth. So my time is pretty much my own to spend as I will. So if I like try out a voice, I'll speak more to this when I go into my demonstration of preparation and performance and all of that. But I'll try out a few things. Usually what I'll do, I'll launch in now. Why not? It's a great question. So usually what I'll do, I read every book all the way through before I start narrating it. The first reason for that is that when I was just starting out, my very first book for BBC Audiobooks America was, I believe it was it wasn't Nora Roberts. It was a bodice ripper that was Kay Hooper. It was a Kay Hooper book. And I was in grad school, so I was very busy. And I read everything but like the last 2 chapters before I stepped into the recording studio that first day. And so what I do usually when I'm preparing, I read the whole manuscript, and I'll keep the document itself open on my computer screen, and I import it into like a PDF annotation program, so that as I go through, I can highlight every character in a different color. So then I've got kind of a roadmap. I'll show you in a moment. And then I keep a Word document open, sometimes 2, depending on the book. If it's a kind of a narrative story sort of situation, I keep one Word document with a running list of the characters I'm encountering. And then I'll type in, like, as the author is describing them, or if there are descriptions within dialogue about the way a person sounds, or the quality of their voice, or where they're from, or anything that's a clue. It's like a treasure hunt. I'll type that next to the character name in my Word document. And I also write in what highlighter color I'm making them. So my program lets me mix the highlighter colors at will. So some are like seafoam green, or, it's coral. And that way, as I get into the rhythm of the book, my eye knows that if I see brown coming up, like in On What Grounds, Detective Mike in that series is always brown. So I know when I see brown that it's Mike. And because oftentimes you'll come up and you'll see the line and then said Mike, and you're like, oh crap. Then you have to go back and do it. But this way, with the colors, I know what's coming. What was the question? I'm going to go back. My brain, my tiny, tiny brain. Oh yes, trying out more voices. So I'll often then, before I'm in the booth, I've compiled these kind of lists for each character about things that the author has said about them. And through that, I will start to craft that sound in my head. What often happens is I will either start to associate that character with a person in my life. And so I'll jot down their name next to the character, and that will help me form the voice. Or if that's not ringing bells, or not as vibrant or easy to latch onto as I want it to be, I'll often cast them in my mind with prominent actors that I know. So like Detective Mike, he has a little bit of a tighter jaw. I kind of think of him as this is gonna show how terrible I am at impressions. But the way that I locate him is my mouth opens a lot less than Claire when she's speaking. So he's got a tighter jaw. His vowels are more narrow. I think of him more in the realm of like a Harrison Ford or Clint Eastwood, who are kind of like they talk a little bit. It's a little bit smaller. Versus if you listen to On What Grounds, Mateo, Claire's ex-husband, I think of him as having taller vowels, as being a little bit more bombastic, using more pitch because he's kind of a showboater when he speaks. So that's the way I differentiate those guys. Mateo's always in yellow too, so that helps. Yeah. Did that answer that question to your satisfaction, Diane? Did that kind of help? Maybe. Good. If it didn't, type it in the chat again and tell me what I'm missing. Have I missed other? How do I keep my voices straight in my mind when voicing multiple people? The color coding is really key for me. And it's different. It's such a new art form that I had to kind of, when I was in acting classes and learning to stage act or act for film, everybody kind of has, oh, thank you, Diane. Each teacher that I worked with had sort of a different method to the madness and the way that you kind of organize your thoughts and wed your body and your behavior in 3 dimensions to what you're learning on the page. Whereas audiobook narration is new enough that there aren't really, at least not when I was coming up. Now it's starting because I'm teaching them, friends are teaching them. There weren't as many classes, and there wasn't like a book that I could buy on audiobook narration to learn how to do it. So I just kind of made my own method, and it continues to develop as I continue to narrate. But the way that works best for me is that color coding. My husband doesn't color code or highlight at all. He just he's got a document where he's got descriptions every now and then of the characters, or he'll, like, the first time he encounters a character in the book, he'll kind of write some notes. He'll make a marker there and write some notes about the character on the side of the text. And sometimes he'll go back and revise it as he learns new things. But his brain, he can just look at the page and intuit who's speaking when and go from that. My brain just kind of goes, great. Let me get back in here. Have I ever done a full cast recording for anything like graphic audio? I have not done full cast recording. I've done multiple narrator projects, but it was always each chapter was standalone for a different point of view, and the narrator would shift chapter to chapter. My husband actually does a lot of full cast recordings for Audible. His name's Charlie Thurston. He's very good, but I'm a little biased. But he's very good. At any rate, and they've got studios that are large enough, or in the before times were large enough that the cast could assemble and be there together and work off each other's energy, which you really can't mimic that breathing together and reacting and taking in what the other person has just served up to you to volley back. And he's done several like that. He's also done several full cast recordings during the time of COVID, and he has his tablet up that has the text that he's working on, and then he's got his laptop running the recording software and plugging into the mic and all of that. And then he usually has his phone also. They use, I can't remember what platform it is. It's like Microsoft Teams or something, and everybody's kind of piped in together through that. So he's also got like 2 different sets of headphones going into his ear. One has everybody else piped in with him, and then the other is his input, so he can hear the recording that he's doing as it's going, making sure that nothing's clicking or popping. And those have been kind of wild and woolly. Everybody's just like we're juggling Zoom etiquette or Zoom, snafus. So are they. So everything takes about 3 times as long during the time of Zoom for that sort of thing. I saw another question. Let's see. How long does it take to record a 300 to 400 page book? Depends on the font. I've learned very quickly to not estimate the length of my book based on page number. I've been in deadline situations where I've been like, oh, it's a 300 page book. That's going to be 8 hours. And then like partway through my week, when I'm also juggling 8 shows and whatever else I'm doing, auditions and stuff, I'm like, oh no, this is going to be 11 hours. But as a rule of thumb, so they'll give me a word count and I'll kind of guesstimate based on that. But as a rule of thumb, I generally allot like 1.5 to 2 hours of actual studio time for each finished hour of audio. So if the book, I'm estimating that the book is going to be about 8 hours long, I'll usually schedule that book to take me 16 hours stretched through the studio. And I found that my rate of work really changes based on if I'm recording from home in my own studio, I'm running all of the sound software myself. So anytime I make a mistake, I then have to go in and like move my cursor back and figure out where I'm going to come back into the audio to start again, because we all make mistakes constantly. It's just part of the thing. That's been a great lesson in audiobooks, is like, how do I just like make the mistake, take a breath, not beat myself up about it, and just breathe and go back in. But when I'm engineering the book for myself, I find that I can usually get tops 2 hours of audio comfortably done. I've had days where I've done 3, and it's, ooh, you don't want to be near me after those days. I'm just kind of drooly and grumpy. But if I'm working in a studio, oh, remember those days where there's a sound engineer that is engineering for me, I can get 4 hours of audio done. So it really is a huge difference. Those sound engineers just take such a load off of my brain and my body, because I can take those moments when I make a mistake. If I'm working with an engineer, I can take those moments to breathe and loosen my body and take a sip of water, as opposed to like doing all of this and then having to reset. So it really it saves me mentally and physically to work with an engineer. But that's not possible right now. Someday. Oh, also the snacks in studios at publishers are way better than at my house. So I miss that. Let's see. Have I missed anything else? Good, good, and good. So this might be a good point to transition over to a little bit of sort of demonstration of the methods that I was talking about. I thought it might be kind of fun to take a look at like attractive text. I was going to start with a nonfiction and show you the text, and then read a little bit, and then show you the text as I've annotated it to help with my narration. So you get a kind of first a bird's eye view of what preparation as a narrator can look like, does look like for me, maybe doesn't look like for anybody else, because I don't know. And then I was also going to show you a section of a young adult book. I've got a page that is annotated that I was going to read through so you can see the voice changes, the character changes as they're going, and kind of feel out the pace. Yeah, let me, should I pause and see if anybody has other questions before I do that? Yeah, I think I've got all those so far. Good. All right, let's see if I can make the screen share work. Safari. All right. So, oh, it's a little blurry, y'all. All right, so this is going to be hard. Wow, it's my crappy camera that just blurred it out, but it's going to be fine. It's going to be like sometimes when I'm driving at night. Okay, good. So this is a book called How to Do Nothing, and it was one of my favorite things to narrate. Let's see if I can get in there. I'm reading this cold again, and then it'll all make more sense when you see my annotations. There's something important that the moment of stopping to listen has in common with the labyrinthine quality of attention-holding architecture. In their own ways, each enacts some kind of interruption, a removal from the spheres. Then I would go back and I would punch in after interruption. I know how to read those waveforms on the thing. A removal from the sphere of familiarity. Every time I see or hear an unusual bird, time stops. And later I wonder where I was, just as wandering some unexpected secret passageway can feel like dropping out of linear time. Even if brief or momentary, these places and moments are retreats. And like longer retreats, they affect the way we see everyday life when we do come back to it. The location of the Rose Garden when it was built in the what? When it was built in the what? 1930s, okay. The location of the Rose Garden when it was built in the 1930s was specifically chosen because of the natural bowl shape of the land. The space feels physically and acoustically enclosed, remarkably separate from everything around it. When you sit in the rose garden, you truly sit in it. Likewise, labyrinths of any kind, by virtue of their shape, collect our attention into these small circular spaces. When Rebecca Solnit, in her book Wanderlust, wrote about walking in the labyrinth inside the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, she found herself barely in the city at all. The circuit was so absorbing, I lost sight of the people nearby and hardly heard the sound of the traffic and the bells for 6 o'clock. Great. So that's a little bit of a section of how to do nothing. And I'm not sure, it would be interesting if I were a cruel person, I would make somebody from class also read a segment of this aloud, because what's interesting about audiobook narration that I've been learning over the years, I think I was too fast in the beginning, is that on stage, I've discovered that we want actors, our brains want actors to speak at the speed of thought. So in life, we all have different tempos of talking in different situations, and you can kind of feel as you're watching actors work if they're firing on the cylinders that match up in your mind for what the situation demands. So on stage, because we're also getting information from our eyes, from like energetically in the room, as people move in the room, you can feel dynamics change, and you read a lot of meaning between two bodies in space. We're not getting that in the audio sphere. And so I discovered pretty quickly that my pacing, especially in like really kind of denser nonfiction, my pace is actually slightly slower than the speed of thought, because I'm wanting to leave a moment here and there between thoughts for the reader to be able to synthesize and reflect, and then I signal with pitch that I'm moving forward. But it took me a while to settle into that different pace. The pace of theater is very different than the pace of audiobook narration, which is even further different than the pace of television, which tends to be incredibly fast, and film, which kind of falls somewhere in between depending on the project. But just learning about that pacing taught me so much as an actor between all of those mediums. It's really been a gift. I think I missed a chat. Oh, thanks, Angie. Thanks. Appreciate that. She says that my voice is relaxing. That's an interesting conversation, just as a sidebar, that training helped me with. When I arrived at grad school, so people often are like, why you learn, like, why would you need a master's degree to learn to act? Like everybody has emotions, don't you just know how to do it? But like, as we move through the world as like successful surviving human beings, all of our bodies put up different defense mechanisms to like navigate through life. And one of the things that had served me really well growing up was I tend to be a little bit hyperactive, and I get really excited and enthusiastic, like organically. That's kind of the way I am in the world. But I think that part of the way that I navigated through the world also was to kind of pop that up a little bit. So it was like my super nice girl voice, which meant that when I arrived at grad school, I talked like this, and my name was Becky Gibel, and this was where my voice lived, and this was just how I talked. And when I would get angry, my voice would go up, right? Which not maybe as relaxing to listen to that, right? So I worked with a man named Tom Jones, not the like chest hairs sing into a microphone Tom Jones, but an equally brilliant vocal coach who was the head of voice at Brown and now is working as a voice coach for film and TV. He's actually we still work together. He's leaving next week to go coach Nicole Kidman on how to be Lucille Ball in the biopic that she's going to start filming. And he worked with, when you see the Aretha biopic starring Jennifer Hudson, he worked with Jennifer crafting her voice for that. But Tom taught me how to unlock different parts of my voice that I didn't have the facility to access previously. So through grad school and my work with Tom Jones, I was able to broaden my palette and speak in this kind of also lower register, as well as making my higher register even more flexible and easeful. So that I feel like Tom Jones kind of gifted me a voiceover career, which I will be forever grateful to that guy. Let me then dip back in to sharing the screen so that I can show you what my manuscript looks like after I mark through it. Okay, let me see if I can magnify this. Great. So this is the same text. And these are just kind of like my own annotations that I've stuck in that make sense to my brain. You all would have different ones that make sense to you. So pardon the blurriness of my copy, I'm so sorry. But for me, I underlined stopping to listen because I identified that as almost like a thesis moment that I wanted to draw out and highlight for the listener. So that was kind of a signifier to me that I need to put this on a sort of like vocal marquee as like a title sentence. So the way that I do that is by slowing my pace slightly, by giving just a slight breath after that little title happens, so that the listener's ear goes, huh. And then I can move on. I also, line breaks don't necessarily correlate with thought breaks. And so oftentimes I'll put an arrow in the margins like here to know that I need to push forward with the idea through the next line. There's another little kind of stop sign with time stops. Good. I make time stop by changing my meter a little bit. And then this slash here is really just like a thought break that I know that even though there's not a period there, which would normally be the thing that tells me like, oh, there's a stop or pause sign, that this was important to make that break, right? And then I put in a parenthetical here with when it was built in the 1930s, so that I know to kind of take that pitchwise and set it aside before I come back to my main sentence. So that should give you an idea. And I'll just do a couple of, just to illustrate that so you can see how it's like traffic signals, how I use my traffic signals in this text. I'll just do a couple of lines. Sorry to repeat, but maybe it's interesting. There's something important that the moment of stopping to listen has in common with the labyrinthine quality of attention-holding architecture, right? You can hear how I move through that end of thought. You can hear how that marquee moment happens. In their own ways, each enacts some kind of interruption, a removal from the sphere of familiarity. Every time I see or hear an unusual bird, time stops. And later, I wonder where I was. Just as wandering some unexpected secret passageway can feel like dropping out of linear time, right? So you can hear, again, how those traffic signals are telling me exactly how to navigate that text that otherwise kind of just looks like an impenetrable block of words on the page. And usually nowadays I'm able to, like, as I'm reading and prepping the text, that first read through, I can hear the text enough in my brain and kind of predict enough that I can just add a couple of traffic signals here and there that I know I'll get hung up on if I don't throw them in, and it just saves me time. Questions based on that? Cool. So I will continue. Oh, when you have a person or place name that you don't know how to pronounce, who do you confirm the answer with? Great question. Yes. So, did I not? So as I'm preparing, I've got the word list of characters, and then I've got another word list depending on the book for pronunciations and things that I'm like, what? Usually it varies from publisher to publisher. When I work with, say, HarperAudio, Harper does a lot of that legwork for me. And so usually when they send me a manuscript, there will also be a list that's included of words that might be uncommon or unfamiliar to me. Tom Jones also taught me the International Phonetic Alphabet, which has been supremely helpful with learning dialects, but also with place names and proper names and anything that I'm unfamiliar with. So oftentimes they'll just write it out in that IPA, and I can read that, or they will have hyperlinks within the document that link either to, Merriam-Webster or YouTube. There's a great tool that I discovered this year that really streamlined for me. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's fascinating and fabulous. It's called Youglish. I'd never heard of this. We should just do a little demo because it's fun. Youglish.com, and it's a tool that was developed to help folks learning to speak English with pronunciations, because English is like the most nonsensical language ever for pronunciations, because we're such a melting pot of so many different languages. So Youglish, you can write in a word. I'm just going to share my screen. I wonder if I can. Is it also going to share sound? Advanced sharing options. No, sometimes it'll let me share sound. Let's see if that happens. Share screen. Oh, look, share sound. Good. So if I go to Safari, I'll go here. So if I go to Safari, yep, I accept your cookies. Fine. And let's say I'm looking for, I don't know, the word gargantuan, right? So I type that in. You can choose which pronunciation you want, US pronunciation, UK, Australia. And then I say it. And I've got 353 references, right? And it takes me to the timestamp in the YouTube video where gargantuan is said. It blew my mind. So then I play.
So this is what I call a gargantuan opportunity for
Do I agree
you
with
to.
that? I don't know. Let's hear another.
Now this is a
Same guy. We don't want him.
Clarity.
Wow, he's really big.
Network. Now, the resources to build and maintain a network like this are gargantuan.
Right? She's got a dialect. Maybe I don't trust that.
They, along with their captain, admitted to seeing a gargantuan white shark.
Right? Like the most helpful thing ever. There's also another website called forvo.com that has, I just did a book that was set in Quebec City. And so I had a ton of questions about like French Canadian pronunciations. And in Forvo, you can set the language filter for what pronunciation you want as well. So everything was set to French. They don't have a French Canadian versus a French France one, but as the pronunciations, it's crowdsourced like Wikipedia. So a lot of words will have like 6 examples of different people saying it, and oftentimes it'll say what country they're from, which is like great. Okay, have I missed anything in the chat? I don't think I have. Great. Okay. So Youglish, super fun. The other thing though, if it's not on Youglish, if it's not on Forvo, I will then search YouTube by hand, because a lot of times this software won't have gotten to everything yet. And then this past month, I did, what was it called? It's such a fun book. It's a book that's all about kind of the ethics of the food service industry and how we can be what food activism is and how that's related to climate change and environmental justice and all of that. And it was individual essays written by a bunch of different food activists. So some are chefs, some are folks that are working in like policy for farmers and farming and seed sourcing. And so there were all these names of people that there was nothing on YouTube. There was nothing in Youglish. So I ended up Googling, and there was a lady that had she'd founded some activist organization. I can't think of it now, but I ended up calling the number, and there was like an answering machine and I left a weird message on the answering machine. And 20 minutes later, their press person got back to me. She called and went, "Oh yeah," and just went through my list and pronounced it all. I was narrating a book called The Alaskan Laundry a few years back, which was a really lovely story. But it took place in like super rural Alaska. And there was this river that I couldn't find the pronunciation anywhere. So I ended up going on, I Googled like Airbnbs in that area. And I ended up calling like 2 or 3 different inns before I found a real person. And they went, "Oh yeah, it's the blah, blah, blah river." I was like, "Thank you, thank you." And then I was doing some mystery thriller that had to do with the FBI. And there were all of these acronyms. And I was like, Googling them and then watching like almost full episodes of Criminal Minds to try and get them to the point where maybe they were going to say that acronym, because sometimes they say the letters, sometimes they turn it into a word. It was a nightmare. And so I ended up finally just kind of like gripping my hair and I called the FBI tip line. It was like, "Can you please, I'm at the end of my rope." And I ended up getting transferred between like 6 or 7 different offices and finally got to this guy that was like, "Yeah, okay." Just went through the wall for me. It was excellent. And I recorded them on like my phone voice recorder, and then I'd get to them in the text and go, "Okay." And boom. Because a lot of times your editors at different publishing houses will catch those mistakes, and a lot of times they won't. So it's happened to me a couple of times where I've relied on the editors and they're overworked and underpaid, like God bless them, and they won't have caught everything, and then the reviews are scathing. So I try to do all of that legwork. Why don't we go back in and take a look at some of the annotation for a piece of fiction. Do I want to share? I don't think I have to share sound anymore. Good. Audiobook resources. So then I want this. Oh, this was a young adult novel that I did a few years back. And I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was awesome. It was set in like the kind of Depression area, Dust Bowl, and it was a story of this young girl. I think she's 11, and she is a giant. And so at age 11, she's already just hugely out of proportion with all of the kids that are contemporaries, and she ends up getting sold to the circus. Her father sells her to the circus. But this is the beginning of the book. So you'll be able to see, like, I think there are 2 characters in this scene. I should look at this because I don't remember actually what I'm doing. Yeah. Oh, it's her paw. So you'll see here that I've got the characters divided up, right? And then I've got mumble in the side here, because seems fitting since I live in a barn. She mumbled. I'd get to the end of that line and be like, "Oh crap." Then I have to go back, right? So I just kind of jot that down as I go. So let's take a listen. Also, pay attention as if you will, to the difference in pacing between this fiction book versus How to Do Nothing, the pacing in nonfiction. Let me see if I can do this justice. Becky, put your feet on the ground. Use your breath. Here we go. His face stayed hard. "Put something clean on, and then get over to the store." "Ain't got nothing clean." "Didn't I have a new dress made just a year ago?" he demanded. "Outgrew it just 6 months ago." "Well, at least wash up. You smell like a barnyard." "Seems fitting, since I live in a barn," she mumbled. "No lip." "I don't want my picture tooken, Pa." "Who said anything about pictures?" "Ain't it always when you want me cleaned up?" "It's different this time." He stepped back out of her shadow. "Now shake a leg. We got important company." As soon as he turned to leave, Babe pursed her ample lips, lifted a leg, and gave it a shake. "How's that?" she said to the barn door. Her breath showed in the chilly morning air. You warm enough? She asked the mama dog. She pulled off her shawl and snuggled it around the dog and her pup, then closed the stall door. With a push and a pull, she moved a wagon against the door Let me go back. With a push and a pull, she moved a wagon against the door to hold the dogs in safe and sound and away from her father. She looked down at them, smiling at the dog murmurs between mother and babe. Don't you worry none. Ain't letting Pa get rid of you. Right? So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how I start to draw with character. Yeah. Questions about that? About what it is to like, do I ever have to edit sound recordings completely? I never have. I've always worked with publishers that do that post-production work for me, but my husband Charlie has. There's a great open marketplace called acx.com that is owned and run and regulated by Audible. And it's a marketplace where narrators and authors and publishers can connect to collaborate on projects together. So narrators are able to directly submit auditions, and authors who are maybe self-published can put forth a casting call and collect those auditions, and everybody, because it's regulated by Audible, there are protections in place on all sides so that it's pretty regulated and safe. You still have to be careful and smart, of course, but that's everywhere. And when working through ACX, you can either opt to edit your own work and have that be part of your pay scale, or you can farm it out to another editor, or, and Charlie has edited his own on occasion, and he learned the few times that he did that, again, the importance and value of engineers, because the thing that takes them 10 minutes to do was taking him like an hour and a half. He's like, oh, maybe my time's better spent. So he did it a few times and then quickly decided that wasn't for him. But I do have friends who are narrators who prefer to engineer and edit all of their work. They like to have that control over their performances. They like to take in that added profit, especially as they get more skilled at that job. And yeah. Let's see. Any advice for someone interested in becoming a voice actor? Yeah, I would say the more you listen, the better. And the more I listened to, as a lady, I was focusing on listening to female identifying narrators, and I loved Catherine Kellgren. I love Therese Plummer. I love, oh gosh, Bailey Carr has a great like young adult sort of body of work. Emily Wu Zeller, I really appreciate, especially for her work in nonfiction. Julia Whalen is masterful at nonfiction. Oh my gosh, I love listening to her. So I just picked kind of my favorite narrators who are at the top of their field, and I continue to learn by listening. So that's one way. Also, Audible has like, each book has like a 7-minute sample. So oftentimes if I didn't have the funds to be able to download the whole book, I would just like go through a narrator's like 200 book catalog and listen to a few samples a day and learn how they're changing between genre, how their pacing changes, where their pitch changes, how much they're spelling out character, because that changes within genre too. Like legit fiction is a different sort of palette of vocal choices than say YA or romance or mystery. It tends to be a little more muted in terms of characterization. People want the reader to be able to do that imagining work for themselves so that they still have agency as listeners. It's not as spoon-fed, I think. So that's one side of it, listen. And then the other side is whenever you can, or if it's something you love, it's a good clue. If it's something you love, practice annotating and reading out loud from some of your favorite books. I did this a bunch. I started that with A Wrinkle in Time, was kind of how I started my own study of that. And then get onto acx.com and poke around. Not only can you for free build your own profile as a narrator for submitting auditions and putting up demos in different genres, they also have something called ACXU, which is ACX University, and it's a free slate of online, like pre-recorded classes that walk you through narration and style. They walk you also through how do you set up your own home booth, your own home recording booth that's going to be up to the level that it would need to be for professional work. They walk you through submitting auditions. It's actually shockingly comprehensive and really valuable information. So that is ACXU is super valuable. So ACX, yeah, that's where I would start. That listening and then narrating on your own out loud is where I would start. Yeah. What am I teaching now? So right now I am teaching at Brown. I'm teaching this semester it's a Brown, like where I went to school, is a broad-based liberal arts program as opposed to a conservatory style program for theater. So everything kind of gets truncated and shoved into fewer classes because everybody's taking everything and has to make room in their schedule to be able to take a lot of different requirements and wear a lot of hats. So my class that I'm teaching right now is a hybrid class between the basics of Shakespearean verse, analyzing it, starting to be able to annotate that for performance, and basic vocal technique for speaking, not necessarily singing, although they're not that different when you think about it. Singing is just you don't, it's like longer notes, right? So I'm working with undergrads we just finished today some Richard III speeches and Romeo and Juliet speeches, and now we're moving on to Julius Caesar on Friday. It's really fun. And I'm teaching the technique of voice that Tom Jones taught to me, so it feels really cool to carry that forward. And the way that he teaches is there's a huge focus on removing any sort of unnecessary tension from the breath apparatus as well as vocal production. Just how much can you undo? How much can you take away? What is the most efficient and necessary amount of breath or tension for producing sounds, right? And then he also divides the voice into I would say 5 different sort of resonator areas, which are sort of made up, but it's helpful to have kind of names and physical locations for them, because it's not like, when you're working your tricep, like you can see your tricep flex, right? When you're working a particular area of your voice, there's nothing to see flexing. So he breaks it into what's called your chest resonator, which is kind of like the deep bass part of your voice, and then hard palate, which is a really it's a very biting I'd say pointy part of your voice that helps your voice carry through in large spaces without a lot of effort. So public speakers who can speak or scream or act or yell or sing 8 shows a week or a few hours a day are using a lot of what Tom calls hard palate, which it's like he's dividing the voice into these 5 elemental resonators that then you can kind of mix together at will to form like your own voice cocktail with different parts of sound to make it's really handy for individual characters in audiobooks. But if you think about the chest resonator as sort of like if you thought about the way that the giant in the Jack and the Beanstalk story would say fee fi fo fum. That's how I think about chest resonator. And then hard palate, if you all have seen The Wizard of Oz, Margaret Hamilton as the Wicked Witch of the West speaks almost entirely in an isolation of hard palate. It's that, I'll get you, my pretty. And you can hear that it's really like sharp and focused and kind of forward in her mouth. And so if you mix together that hard palate sound with a lot of that chest resonator, you get a deep, fat sound that can cut through space strongly. And when I came into grad school, I was lacking chest resonator almost entirely. I was all like super skull high up. I sounded like a little bit like a Julia Child, Margaret Hamilton combo platter. Yes. Was that Greek? Did that make any sense? What am I teaching? Oh, do I have any fun stories about celebrities I have met on set? Oh, good. Thanks, Angie. Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm relatively new to the TV and film world. I've only really been working consistently in it since like, I don't know, 2010, and it's ramped up considerably in the last few years. But so I'll tell you a story about an audition. It was my first television audition and also the first role that I booked for TV film. So I knew nothing. And then I'll tell you a story about a day on set with Mark Wahlberg, which was really fun. So I was auditioning for this role in Blue Bloods, and like you all have met me for a hot second today. The character description was she's a kickboxing rookie cop who she like severe, her ponytail is slicked back so hard that it like pulls her face. And I was like, oh no, that's not me. So I decided to swing hard for it. And I decided that they would never believe my acting if I walked into the room acting like me. So I decided that I was going to walk in just like low key, a little bit in character. And your first audition for a TV film project, oftentimes it's just you go into a very tiny room with like usually an assistant casting director, usually not even the main casting director. So I walked into my first audition. There's a waiting room of women. We were all auditioning, I think, for the same role that day. And a lot of them, I wore combat boots and like some gray wool pants and like a ribbed tank top. And I was wearing no makeup, and I like penciled in my eyebrows a little darker, and I slicked back my hair. And I walked into the waiting room, and there were ladies, their hair was slicked back, but they were wearing like lashes and like stiletto boots and, full face of makeup. And I was like, push-up bras. And I was like, oh no, oh, this was a terrible mistake. Okay. But I decided, what am I going to do? I'm here already. So I went into the room and I introduced myself, and I decided that I was going to kind of change my tempo, and I was just not going to smile, and I was going to be kind of slower. So I did that, and I did the read, and then I left. And I got home, and by the time I got home off the train, my agent had called saying that they wanted to see me for a callback the next day. And what I didn't know is that the callback usually is in a different location in a larger room. This one was, I walked into this larger room, and there was a table full of people on the other side. So I'd gone from one young person in this room taping me on a camcorder to walking in, and it was like kind of a conference room situation. And there were like 3 older dudes, and then the woman that I had met the day before, and then the actual casting director. And then I didn't know who a couple of there were like 6 or 7 people behind the table. And I'd never been in that building before. I think it was on like the Lower East Side. And I wore the same thing. So I was like, well, that worked. So I walked in, and I did my read, and it went okay. And of course, like my heart is just freaking out. I'm trying to like stay cool on the outside. And they asked me a couple of questions. And one of the older men said, so, do you feel comfortable? Like, this is a pretty physical role. Do you feel comfortable with that? And I had lived in Memphis for a couple of years, and I'd ended up getting recruited to train at this boxing gym. That's a whole other story. But so I kind of popped that up, and I was like, yeah, I know my way around a boxing gym. Like I boxed low-key professional for a couple of years, like semi-professional. And I've been in the ring. Like I'm confident with contact. And they were like, oh, okay. And then I said, thanks. And I like confidently, I was like, nailed it, freaking nailed that. So I like sauntered back out what I thought was the door I'd come in, and it was a broom closet. So I like got into the broom closet and went, oh God. and I was like, maybe if I don't come back out, they'll just think that I left. So there was like a weird pause of like 6 seconds while I had to decide what to do. And I walked back out and went, broom closet. And I left. And I called my agent and was like, well, I'm never going to hear from them again. I'm probably never going to be called into that office ever again. Like, that was a disaster. And the next day the agent called and said, well, they've rewritten the role. They want you to do it. And they've made her comedic. So I went into auditioning for like this kickboxing rookie cop and came out like as something entirely different. But that's ridiculous. Yeah. And then for Spenser Confidential, I went through a very extensive audition process involving like watching Italian cinema for like this hyper realistic form. I like did my audition, and then Pete Berg, who is the director, writer guy, like sent a message over being like, that's great. Now can you watch this hyper realistic Italian television series from a couple of years ago? This is the style I want. I want it super grounded, super realistic. And it's like, okay, great. So I watched this thing, and then I went back in and auditioned again. It went well. There was like a standalone scene with me and Mark that I auditioned with. And as I booked it, and then as we were getting closer to the shoot date, you keep getting emails from like the second assistant director is usually in charge of sending emails about script changes. And like every week we'd get a new script update, and like the first one, like my standalone scene with Mark was cut. The second one, my the scene where in the funeral was cut. The third one, there was like a car ride that I was talking to my husband. That was cut. So by the time we got to set, my role no longer had any lines. And I was getting like I was getting the crap beat out of me by my dirtbag husband. And then Mark walks into the middle of that and ends up getting in the fight with the husband. And like it was a big plot point. It's, spoiler alert, it sends him to jail. So I was really sad because I was like, I went from like this awesome role to literally no lines and just like showing up bloody on camera and nothing. And the day of, so there's a close up on me, and I talked to my husband the night before and been like, he comes in and says like, can I, like, what's wrong, ma'am? And I think like I knew that she stayed with him because 10 years later at the funeral, she was still there, like when her husband died 10 years later in the film before. So I was like, I don't think that she would be on Mark's side in this moment. And so when the camera flipped to me and they did my coverage after Mark came in, I was working with a fair amount of anger. And Berg, I didn't know, every set is different, but Berg, I guess, really likes to work with improvisation. And so he saw that, and he was in the next room watching the video monitors. He's not in the room with us. And he came through the overhead monitor and said, hey, it looks like you want to say something. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, good, let's do another take. You can like say what you want. And so, pardon my French, as Mark was coming to save me, I said, get the fuck out of my house. And he was like, oh, okay. So then that changed to like, he was like, why don't you repeat it a few times? And so I did. And then he was like, you look like you want to move. And I was like, yeah. So I ended up charging Wahlberg, like charging forward in what became that improvisation. And then I thought like that was supposed to be the only shot I was in. So I thought that I was wrapped for the show, the film, and I was going to leave. And as they were going to take me back to the trailer, Berg came out from behind the monitors and said, hey, are you free for, can I bring you back for another day? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, Mr. Berg. And he said, great. Do you mind hanging around? I'm thinking that it might work for this next scene. And the next scene was the knockdown, drag out fight between Mark and the husband and like 3 other cops. And so what ended up happening, he was like, why don't you try and pull Mark off of him? And I, fought in a boxing gym for a while. So I came down there and tried to pull him off. And Berg was like, okay, great, cut. It looks like would you be okay like getting a little more physical with him? And I was like, yeah. He's like, hit him a couple times. It's like, okay. So Mark Wahlberg and I talked through it and figured out how I was going to, and so it ended up being this full day of combat with Mark Wahlberg, where we were step by step building this fight that then kind of spiraled out of control, and other people came in and pulled us off, and it was crazy. It was the craziest thing I think that had happened to me to date was when Peter Berg came up to and pulled me aside and went, "How do you feel about hitting Mark?" It's like, feel pretty good about it. So it became that was a strange and exciting celebrity moment. Other questions, or how are we doing? It was wild. It was a good day. And he was very Mark Wahlberg was very systematic and professional. And we mapped through everything and made sure that everybody was comfortable. But what was also strange was that because he had been scripted to be in that scene, and my husband, the actor, had been scripted to be in that scene, they had stuntmen. So then the stuntmen would come in and do a lot of the coverage. I did not have a stunt person because I wasn't supposed to be in it. So they'd tap out and the stunt team would come in and I'd be like, okay. And then I have to tumble with these hockey players. It was pretty wild. It worked out well. Nobody died. It's good. Only one stuntman bled. That's good. Everybody else bled fake, but yeah. Oh, I should unhost. I should unhost so that people can, how do I? Angie, I'm throwing back hosting to you. Change host. There. Can you unmute yourself now? Does that work? I left you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Rebecca, that was awesome.
It was ridiculous.
I'm laughing the whole time and I know you can't hear me.
Oh, good.
Couldn't hear me laughing.
Into the void. I'm like, is this thing on? That's why I said theater, because you can hear the
Trust me,
laughter.
there was laughter. You just didn't hear it.
It was bonkers. It was a crazy day.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, Anna says she was laughing too. So
Oh, good.
you had some laughter. You just didn't hear it. Sorry about that.
I could kind of sense it.
Any other questions, guys, that we can think of? This has been so much fun, Rebecca. I really appreciate you taking time to tell us about it. I know a lot of us are major audiobook fans, and it's so cool to hear how you do it from that end, because it's just such a fun experience. So Diane was laughing too, she said. So we were all laughing, but well, okay, I guess we'll draw it to a close then. Do you have any last things you want to say or plug or anything?
No, I talked my brains out. That was it's a delight to be with you all. It's so nice narrating. I guess I do have something to say. Narrating is such a solitary endeavor that I just love the opportunity to engage with folks that love audiobooks and kind of complete the circle and feel that community that does exist, but just doesn't exist in synchronous time together usually. So I'm really glad to share time and space with you all, even though we're remote.
Do you have any upcoming things that we can keep our eye out for you?
So I'm in a series called Bridge and Tunnel. I'm playing Ed Burns's wife, and the season 1 finale airs on Sunday on Epix, but you can catch all of that. It's all streaming. It's a lot of fun. It's light and delightful and nostalgic. And then this one hasn't come out yet, but keep an eye out for me in a new Adam McKay film with Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence that will be on Netflix once it's edited and done together. That was filming that in the pandemic was really interesting. We filmed Bridge and Tunnel in the pandemic as well, the Ed Burns piece, and it was a huge learning curve on both. So I'm this much of a role in Don't Look Up, the Leonardo J-Law one, but I'm a larger role in Bridge and Tunnel. So yeah.
That is so cool. I'm going to hit stop on the record here real quick. Let's stop it.